The bustling city of Kaffa, perched on the edge of the Black Sea, was alive with commerce and the mingling of many cultures. Matteo di Firenze, a merchant known for his keen eye and steady hand, lived there with his wife Lucia and young son Paolo. The year was 1346, and the city thrived as a gateway between East and West, a crucial node on the Silk Road's vast network. Yet shadows loomed. The Mongol army, relentless and ruthless, had besieged Kaffa. Behind the walls, a deadly secret lurked, a mysterious sickness spreading faster than any sword. When infected bodies were flung over the city's walls, panic gripped the populace. The symptoms were horrifying. Fevers, chills, and buboes the size of eggs appearing on swollen limbs. Matteo knew he had to leave. The journey back to Florence would be perilous, but it was their only hope. As they set sail, Matteo's thoughts were heavy. Ships carried more than silk and spices. They bore the plague hidden in fleas, hitching rides on rats. Passing through ports like Constantinople and Venice, the family witnessed fear and chaos. Markets emptied, priests prayed fervently, and families barricaded themselves indoors. Their journey was marked by tragic scenes, abandoned villages, hastily dug graves, and the haunting silence of towns emptied by death. When they finally reached Florence, Matteo found his home changed. The city enforced quarantines, sealing outsiders away. The family endured weeks in isolation, with dwindling supplies and rising desperation. Disease soon infiltrated Florence's heart. Streets became rivers of sorrow, and the city's great cathedral echoed with prayers for the dying. Matteo and Lucia fought to protect Paolo, but the plague was indiscriminate. The narrative unfolds as the family confronts loss, fear, and hope amid the pandemic. Matteo's journals capture not only the disease's devastation, but the human spirit's resilience, the acts of kindness, the moments of courage, and the faint flickers of hope amid despair. Florence in the early months of 1348 was a city gripped by an invisible terror. The Black Death moved swiftly through the narrow streets and crowded houses. Matteo, his wife Lucia, and their son Paolo found themselves caught in a whirlwind of sickness and fear. The first signs appeared subtly, a fever here, a cough there. Soon neighbors began to fall ill, one after another. Matteo's spice shop, once filled with merchants and travelers, stood empty as customers vanished. Doctors and healers donned the strange outfits, long cloaks and bird-like masks stuffed with aromatic herbs, hoping to guard against the noxious miasma they believed caused the plague. Their remedies were a mix of superstition and limited medical knowledge, bloodletting, purging, and burning incense. Despite their efforts, death was relentless. Matteo took to writing detailed journals, chronicling symptoms, outbreaks, and the emotional toll on families. His writings speak of desperation and resilience, the mothers who held their dying children, the neighbors who cared for the sick despite their own fears. Lucia fell ill, her strength fading day by day. Matteo and Paolo cared for her with herbs and prayers, hoping against hope. The community rallied around the afflicted, but resources were scarce and despair was widespread. Public officials struggled to maintain order. Mass graves were dug outside city limits, and cart drivers labored tirelessly to collect the dead. Fear bred mistrust. Accusations flew, with minority groups like the Jewish community scapegoated for the plague's spread. Religious fervor exploded. Flagellant processions, where men whipped themselves in public displays of penance, swept through the streets. Some sought comfort in faith, others in superstition. The plague challenged the very foundations of society. Yet amid darkness, stories of heroism emerged. Alessandra, a learned physician, defied convention to care for the sick. She advocated for isolation and cleanliness, practices far ahead of her time. Matteo worked alongside her, learning and helping to establish makeshift infirmaries. Paolo, once a carefree boy, matured quickly. He witnessed death, suffering, and the fragile thread of life. His reflections, recorded in secret journals, reveal a young mind grappling with mortality and hope. The chapter explores the social, religious, and medical responses to the Black Death, revealing the complexity of human behavior in crisis. It also traces how these events seeded changes that would echo through history. Florence in the early months of 1348 was a city gripped by an invisible terror. The Black Death moved swiftly through the narrow streets and crowded houses. Matteo, his wife Lucia, and their son Paolo found themselves caught in a whirlwind of sickness and fear. The first signs appeared subtly: a fever here, a cough there. Soon neighbors began to fall ill, one after another. Matteo's spice shop, once filled with merchants and travelers, stood empty as customers vanished. Doctors and healers donned strange outfits, long cloaks and bird-like masks stuffed with aromatic herbs, hoping to guard against the noxious miasma they believed caused the plague. Their remedies were a mix of superstition and limited medical knowledge: bloodletting, purging, and burning incense. Despite their efforts, death was relentless. Matteo took to writing detailed journals, chronicling symptoms, outbreaks, and the emotional toll on families. His writings speak of desperation and resilience: the mothers who held their dying children, the neighbors who cared for the sick despite their own fears. Lucia fell ill, her strength fading day by day. Matteo and Paolo cared for her with herbs and prayers, hoping against hope. The community rallied around the afflicted, but resources were scarce and despair was widespread. Public officials struggled to maintain order. Mass graves were dug outside city limits, and cart drivers labored tirelessly to collect the dead. Fear bred mistrust. Accusations flew, with minority groups like the Jewish community scapegoated for the plague's spread. Religious fervor exploded. Flagellant processions, where men whipped themselves in public displays of penance, swept through the streets. Some sought comfort in faith, others in superstition. The plague challenged the very foundations of society. Yet amid darkness, stories of heroism emerged. Alessandra, a learned physician, defied convention to care for the sick. She advocated for isolation and cleanliness, practices far ahead of her time. Matteo worked alongside her, learning and helping to establish makeshift infirmaries. Paolo, once a carefree boy, matured quickly. He witnessed death, suffering, and the fragile thread of life. His reflections, recorded in secret journals, reveal a young mind grappling with mortality and hope. The chapter explores the social, religious, and medical responses to the Black Death, revealing the complexity of human behavior in crisis. It also traces how these events seeded changes that would echo through history. As the plague tightened its grip on Florence through the months of 1348 and into 1349, the city's social fabric began to unravel. Families were torn apart, neighborhoods emptied, and a heavy silence fell over marketplaces and churches. Matteo, Lucia, and Paolo endured hardships that reshaped their lives forever.
One of the most haunting realities was the widespread death of children. Paolo, once lively and playful, witnessed friends and neighbors fall silent. The loss was not only physical, but emotional. The city mourned a generation. Matteo's journals describe how the economy faltered. Merchants fled, trade slowed to a crawl, and artisans found themselves without work. Laborers, suddenly scarce, gained new leverage, sowing the seeds for future social upheavals. The church struggled to maintain its authority. Clergy numbers dwindled as priests succumbed to the disease, leaving many without spiritual guidance. Some questioned their faith, while others doubled down on religious rituals and penance.
Medical understanding was rudimentary but evolving. Alessandra continued her pioneering work, emphasizing hygiene, ventilation, and the isolation of the sick. Her treatments offered hope to some and were a stark contrast to the superstitions surrounding the illness. Public health measures were rudimentary: the burning of aromatic herbs, quarantine zones, and attempts to control movement. However, these efforts were often undermined by fear, ignorance, and resistance. Despite the chaos, moments of compassion shone through. Volunteers risked their lives to care for the ill, bury the dead, and maintain order. Matteo and Alessandra's infirmary became a beacon of hope amid despair. As 1349 approached, the plague's initial wave began to wane. Florence was a changed city, scarred but surviving. Matteo, Lucia, and Paolo faced a new reality, one where loss and hope coexisted, and the future was uncertain. The chapter closes with reflections on resilience, the human capacity to rebuild, and how the Black Death paved the way for transformations in European society, culture, and thought. With the plague's first devastating wave subsiding in 1349, Florence began the slow, painful process of recovery. The city's streets, once strewn with bodies and silence, gradually stirred with cautious life. Matteo, Lucia, and Paolo faced a changed world, a world marked by loss but ripe with new possibilities. The economic landscape shifted dramatically. With so many laborers lost, those who survived found their skills in higher demand. Wages rose, and peasants and workers began to challenge the old feudal order. Matteo observed these changes keenly, writing in his journals about the newfound power of common folk and the tensions it caused among the nobility. Religious life evolved, too. Though many remained deeply devout, the plague sparked theological debates about suffering, divine justice, and human free will. The Church, shaken but resilient, sought to regain trust through reform and renewed outreach. Some saw the seeds of skepticism and rational inquiry taking root, foreshadowing the intellectual awakening of the Renaissance. Matteo and Alessandra continued their partnership, pushing forward medical knowledge and public health practices. Their work laid foundations for later generations, emphasizing cleanliness, isolation, and compassion. Paolo, growing into a young man, studied philosophy, languages, and medicine. He was determined to honor the lessons of the plague by helping build a healthier, wiser society. Florence slowly rebuilt, homes repaired, markets reopened, and art flourished once more. The city's scars remained, but so did its spirit. This chapter explores the aftermath of the Black Death, the social, cultural, and intellectual transformations that arose from tragedy. It highlights human resilience and the enduring quest for meaning amid suffering. As the years passed after the Black Death, Europe gradually transformed in profound ways. The demographic collapse forced by the plague reshaped social structures, economies, and cultures. In Florence, Matteo observed how the labor shortage empowered peasants and artisans, leading to demands for better wages and living conditions. This shift weakened feudalism and planted the seeds for a more modern economic system. The Church, despite its losses, played a central role in community life, but faced growing criticism. The spiritual crises triggered by the plague encouraged philosophical debates and a gradual movement toward humanism. Matteo's writings reflect the gradual return of hope. Stories of rebirth, new art and literature inspired by suffering, and innovations in medicine and science. Alessandra's teaching spread, emphasizing hygiene and isolation techniques that would influence future public health policies. Paolo emerged as a young scholar, dedicated to understanding both the horrors and the lessons of the plague. His journals speak of hope amid sorrow and the belief that knowledge and compassion could prevent future catastrophes. The chapter concludes by linking the plague's devastation to the birth of the Renaissance, an era defined by renewed curiosity, creativity, and progress. The Renaissance, born in the shadow of the Black Death, was as much a revival of human spirit as it was of art and science. Paolo, now a learned young man, became part of this new wave of thinkers who questioned old beliefs and sought to understand the world through observation and reason. Matteo's spice shop transformed into a center not just for trade, but for knowledge exchange. Merchants, scholars, and physicians gathered to share ideas, inspired by the urgency that the plague had instilled in society. Public health improved gradually. Cities began to regulate sanitation, control overcrowding, and establish early quarantine laws inspired by the devastating lessons of the past. Religious practices also adapted. While faith remained vital, new philosophies encouraged critical thinking and emphasized the importance of individual experience. Alessandra's medical innovations were preserved and passed down through generations, influencing the development of modern medicine. Paolo's journals, combining personal memoir and scientific inquiry, became valued records that helped shape future responses to disease. The chapter explores how trauma can spark transformation and how the legacy of the plague extended far beyond death, catalyzing centuries of progress. As the 15th century dawned, Europe was forever changed. The shadow of the Black Death lingered, but it also cast light on new paths forward. Cities like Florence thrived anew, their populations rebounding and their cultures flourishing. Trade routes expanded once more, fueled by renewed curiosity and ambition. Matteo's descendants continued his legacy, weaving together commerce and knowledge. Art, literature, and science blossomed anew. Painters captured the human experience in ways never before seen. Writers explored themes of mortality, resilience, and hope. Medical science advanced steadily, building on the foundations laid by visionaries like Alessandra. The importance of hygiene, quarantine, and careful observation became cornerstones of public health. Societies grew more interconnected, sharing lessons and innovations across borders. The collective memory of the plague fostered both caution and courage. Paolo's journals, preserved in libraries, inspired generations to balance faith with reason, tradition with progress. The story of survival during the Black Death became a timeless testament to human endurance and adaptability. The ripple effects of the Black Death continued to shape Europe's destiny well into the Renaissance and beyond. Communities rebuilt their lives, often with a newfound appreciation for health and science. Public health initiatives slowly formalized. Cities invested in clean water systems, waste removal, and better housing to prevent the return of such devastation. Education expanded. Universities included medicine, philosophy, and natural sciences in their curricula, driven by the desire to understand and prevent future plagues. Religious institutions, though challenged, evolved to meet the needs of changing societies, balancing faith with the emerging scientific worldview. Mateo's family, now a symbol of resilience, contributed to these transformations through trade, scholarship, and public service. The lessons of the plague became ingrained in culture, a cautionary tale, a call for compassion, and a reminder of human vulnerability and strength. As generations passed, the memory of the plague became both legend and warning. Stories were told not only of death, but of survival, resilience, and the rebirth that followed. The people of Florence and all of Europe carried those memories in their customs, their laws, and their hearts. Schools taught the lessons of the past. Children learned how their ancestors had faced an invisible enemy with courage and care. Monuments were erected, not only to mourn the dead, but to honor those who had risked everything to protect others. Literature and art immortalized the suffering and strength of the era. Writers like Boccaccio penned tales inspired by those dark days, while artists captured the fragility and beauty of life with renewed urgency. Paolo, now an old man, reflected on the arc of his life. He had seen horror and healing, loss and love. In his final writings, he urged future generations not only to prepare for calamity, but to build a world where compassion guided science and policy. His closing pages of his journal carried this thought:
When the air once again carries sorrow and the streets fall silent, may this not be the end, but the moment we remember who we are and what we must protect. The story of Matteo, Lucia, and Paolo did not end with the plague. It became part of a longer human journey. Their choices, struggles, and survival echoed through time, woven into the fabric of European history. Centuries later, in distant lands and future pandemics, the lessons of their lives remained relevant. When cholera struck, when influenza spread across continents, and when a novel virus shut down the modern world, the echoes of 1348 could still be felt. Quarantine, hygiene, public health, and community care, concepts born out of desperation during the Black Death, became cornerstones of survival. Modern medicine, public policy, and global cooperation all found their roots in those distant days of fire and fear. Paolo's descendants carried his writings forward, preserving them in libraries and homes. His legacy was not of tragedy, but of remembrance. And in those quiet pages were not only facts and dates, but deeply human truths: the pain of separation, the gift of recovery, the miracle of compassion. As this chronicle draws to a close, we are reminded that history is not just a record of what happened, but a mirror held to our present and a light cast on our future. The plague, though cruel, taught humanity to value life, to question blindly followed tradition, and to forge new paths in times of uncertainty. And so, in the story of one family, we find the story of us all. How in the face of darkness, we do not retreat into fear, but reach for one another and move forward.